One of the informed players in the country, as we mentioned, Marcus Rashford. We spent the majority of last week's pod bigging him up, only for him to limp off with a groin injury. Now, Jules, Erik ten Hag has confirmed he won't be available this weekend, but he will be for the run-in. What do we take away from that? Because it's quite vague, isn't it?
It is. And I think what we take away is that it's great for Manchester United and Marcus Rashford to have a blank game week, because that means an extra weekend to rest. So I think he will be ready for game week 33, which is it's a midweek game away at Spurs, which, as we know, Kelly, is an easy fixture.
Toughest place to go in the land. Toughest place to go.
Especially if Sam is in the stand and they never win when she's there.
I'm going to be there. I'm going to be there, Jules.
Exactly. But you would think that certainly that weekend off is great news because that gives him more time to recover. I think there was quite a lot of pessimism when the injury happened. It looked bad. I think now with the treatment, all the work with the physio, he does pretty much 24/7. Work with the physio for that groin injury, you'd think that he should be okay for in 10 days time, basically. But it's tricky, so we'll have to keep you updated next week, for example. But you would think that it should be okay.
Well, Rich, I'm maybe understanding why you've been struggling so much this season. You're one of the few teams I've looked at that doesn't have Marcus Rashford, so at least you've got one less headache for this week, I guess.
Yeah, I had him in the team up until recently, and he was doing so well for me. In fact, I was captaining him. It was one of those things where there was a game week a few weeks back where literally I could only field about 4 players. So I kind of chopped around a few things, took some hits of some penalty points, doing extra transfers. And that was a complete disaster. And now the team feels really unbalanced. All those players that just generally deliver just didn't. And so I kind of moved him out and brought Saka in, who seemed to be kind of really buzzing and sort of hasn't sort of got back to where he was really since then. So I would look to hopefully, I would look to bring him back in, but not until he's sort of guaranteed to be starting, really.
Sam, come on then, tell me what your plan is with him, because are you going to bench him in the hope that he's only out for a couple of weeks, or do you think there's better replacements and that we should just get rid for now and then wait and see and bring him back as and when we need to?
For me, I was really struggling with what to do with Rashford, and Ten Hag's comments weren't that helpful, because what does the run-in actually mean? Does the run-in...
I thought we were in the run-in.
Well, so did I. So I thought the run-in, as far as I'm concerned, the run-in's already started. We are in the run-in to the end of the season, but does the run-in actually mean the last 4 games, the last 5 games? That kind of ambiguity makes it difficult for us as FPL managers. He said he'd be out for a few matches. Now, a few matches, of course, could just mean game week 31 plus the FA Cup plus the Europa League. That's a few, isn't it? That's 3. I think there are some really, really good options in the midfield at the moment. And, I bought in Jack Grealish last week as part of my wildcard. If you don't have him and you do have a free hit, he could be a nice option, because there are so many great midfield picks right now. And with game week 32 in mind, like if you don't have your free hit, like Rich and Jules, then I think potentially selling Rashford is something that you might do, because we don't know for definite when he'll be back. And are you going to want to bench a player that we can save him for 34, knowing he might not make it? I think that's kind of where the quandary lies for most managers. I think I'm going to sell Rashford this week.
Okay, on that bombshell, you've mentioned there a couple of the replacements. You mentioned Grealish. Who are you going to bring in for him? Because I think that's the next part of this conversation, isn't it? If managers are to sell him, who are the best people to bring in for him?
So I think Grealish is absolutely up there. And I think, if you've got additional money, then you could absolutely go up to KDB. But I think for me, at the price point that Grealish is, basically half KDB's value, he is the standout pick for me at Man City in that midfield. I have one major regret from my wild card, and that's selling Gabriel Martinelli. I did it because Arsenal didn't have any doubles, and I wanted to drop down to allow me to have Gabriel Jesus a little bit later on in the season, freeing up that spot basically. And I kept Saka instead of Martinelli because I felt like Saka was more likely to avoid rotation with Trossard for that slot. As it's gone, I immediately, as soon as the deadline passed, regretted the decision to sell Martinelli, and I would really like him back in. So he is a player that potentially could come back in replacement for Marcus Rashford. And if you don't have a free hit, then the Crystal Palace midfielders, bizarrely, suddenly look like great options.
Yeah, Michael Elise in particular, 3 assists against Leeds, and their fixtures aren't too bad either, are they, Sam?
No, really,
Great,
really nice
yeah.
fixtures. If you don't have a free hit, then I think they are exactly the sort of team you want to be targeting right now, because great fixtures, finding their form. They need another couple of wins to be absolutely sure that they're going to survive in the league, but it's looking more and more likely every week. And with the fixtures they have, they look like they might get them quickly. So I think for me, Eze, Elise, one of those guys looks like a really nice pick right now. If you're not free hitting, if you are free hitting, maybe you don't want to target them. Maybe you want to go with Man City, because you can bring them in for the blank in 32 anyway as part of your free hit.
Jules, talking about Manchester City, I know you waxed lyrical about Grealish last week and he backed it up with his performance, but is there any merit in looking at one of your other boys, Riyad Mahrez, at the moment, given the fact that Phil Foden's injured as well?
I think it's more because there's the Champions League second leg against Bayern, and City already have one foot and 4 toes in the quarterfinals, in the semi-final. Let's be honest. So I think there's less risk of a Pep roulette this weekend, also because they've got Leicester at home. That they would be maybe had the first leg between City and Bayern was 1-1, or City just won 1-0, for example, with a 3-0 lead going to Germany next week. I think Pep can maybe rotate less than what he would have done. I don't know. So I think you could see Mahrez coming back in the team and Bernardo Silva having a rest, because you know that Silva is going to play against Bayern next week. And I think Mahrez then becomes a great shout, of course. But again, there's a big if he plays, if he starts. I think Grealish won't be rested for the game against Leicester, might just play an hour. I think Haaland will play now. Again, he might have been rested if the tie with Bayern was a bit more even, but now he can play an hour and then still play in Munich next week as well. So I think we've got less of a risk of Pep roulette now after that win. But yeah, Mahrez could be in contention if you free hit and you can bring him in.
A word too, Jules, on Gabriel Martinelli, because Sam mentioned it there. I'm going to play my wild card this week, I think. Now, I didn't do it. I resisted last week in the end. And like Sam, I was going to get rid of Bukayo Saka. Again, I benched Gabriel Martinelli. I think that's 2 weeks in a row now, 13 points on my bench this week. Is Martinelli now the must-have Arsenal midfielder?
He's the most informed, for sure. I mean, we've said it all through the season that you can't really tell, because they have all been great at some point, and you can even add Odegaard to it, to be honest. So, but it's just that it feels like the Trossard signing and everything that Trossard brought on the pitch for Arsenal was great, but he also gave that boost to Martinelli to say, you went through yeah, exactly. You went through a bit of a deep, to be fair, which is true. And now I think that like we see in many transfers, when competition arrives in your squad and suddenly you're not sure if you're going to start, then that brings the best in you, really. And I think that's what happened with Martinelli. But the performance that he had at Liverpool, certainly he's the most informed of them all. But nobody can say that against West Ham this weekend on Sunday. Saka who's going to have a great game and Martinelli maybe a bit more quiet, or Gabriel Jesus or the other one. That's the beauty of this Arsenal side.
Yeah, you could do what Rich has done and just keep them both. I notice you've had both the Arsenal midfielders, Rich, and I imagine that's been pretty fruitful for you.
Yeah, I had Odegaard and Martinelli, and they were doing really well. And I don't know why I just sort of just tinkered with some things and brought Saka back, but they've been great. I mean, that literally most of the points I've got at any time have been through having those Arsenal players in there and having those Newcastle guys in defence, because they've also had a really mean, stingy defence, haven't they? And that's done really well for me. You know, I'm just hoping that Saka starts to start banging some goals in. That would be handy if I'm going to hang on to him.